My name is Deborah, and I'm 27 years old. I guess I've always been a bit of a science nerd. Not in a crazy, mad scientist kind of way, but I really, really loved biology. Like, from the time I was a kid, looking at pond water under a microscope, or seeing how a plant grows from a tiny seed. It always felt like magic, but logical magic, you know? Like there were rules to everything, and if you understood those rules, you could actually help things grow, or heal. That's why becoming a pharmacist just made so much sense to me. It wasn't just about handing out pills, it was about understanding how chemicals interact with our bodies, making sure people get safe, effective stuff. My whole thing was about integrity, about making sure what's on the label is actually what's inside, especially when it comes to people's health. So, when I finished pharmacy school, I was buzzing with excitement. I pictured myself working for a company that truly cared about wellness, somewhere I could actually use my scientific background to make a real difference. And then, I saw the job posting for Pura Life Organics in San Diego. Man, that place looked like a dream come true. Their Instagram was all about healthy living, bright, airy offices, smiling people. They made dietary supplements, vitamins, protein powders, stuff like that. Their big selling point was all natural, pure ingredients, backed by science. That last part, backed by science, really got me. I thought, this is it. This is where I belong. The interview process was pretty intense, but in a good way. They seemed super impressed with my pharmacy background, my knowledge of biochemistry, and my passion for quality control. They talked a lot about their cutting-edge research and their commitment to consumer well-being. Brad, the CEO, was this super charismatic guy, probably in his late 40s or early 50s, with a permanent tan and a really confident, persuasive way of speaking. He told me about how Pura Life was going to revolutionize the supplement industry, taking it from shady backroom deals to transparent, science-backed solutions. I bought it hook, line, and sinker. I was so excited when they offered me the position as a product quality specialist. I pictured myself ensuring every batch was perfect, every claim true. My first few weeks at Pura Life were a whirlwind. The office itself was awesome, all open plan, natural light, kombucha on tap, ergonomic chairs. Everyone was young, energetic, always talking about synergy and disrupting the market. I jumped right in, eager to learn every step of their process, from raw ingredient sourcing to final product testing. I spent hours reading through their existing lab reports, ingredient supplier certifications, and manufacturing protocols. I genuinely wanted to understand everything, to be the best product quality specialist they'd ever had. But then, little things started to feel off. It wasn't anything huge at first, just subtle nudges that didn't quite sit right with my pharmacist's brain. For example, during a team meeting about launching a new brain boost supplement, I asked about the specific analytical methods they used to verify the exact dosage of certain active compounds, especially since some of them were pretty sensitive. I also inquired about the stability testing. How long did they ensure the product retained its potency after manufacturing? Brad, my CEO, waved a hand dismissively. Deborah, darling, he said, with that charming smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, we use industry standard methods. And our stability is best in class. No need to get bogged down in the minutiae. We're about getting great products to market, fast. He laughed, and a few others chuckled along. I felt a prickle of unease. Minutiae? In science, especially pharmacy, details are everything. Another time, I noticed a batch of a popular protein powder that had slightly different raw material certificates than previous ones. I brought it up to my direct manager, Sarah, who was nice enough but seemed constantly stressed. Hey Sarah, I'd said, holding up the paperwork. This batch's amino acid profile looks a little different. Did we switch suppliers or something? We might need to rerun some full panel tests, just to be sure it matches our label claims perfectly. Sarah just sighed, rubbing her temples. Look, Deborah, I appreciate your diligence, really. But that's just a variation. The raw material is fine. Brad wants this batch out by end of week. We can't hold up production for every tiny little thing. Just clear it. But it's not tiny, Sarah, I tried to explain, my voice probably sounding a bit too earnest. If the amino acid profile is off, even a little, it affects the total protein content, and that's a direct label claim. People rely on that for their nutrition, especially athletes. She just gave me that same tired, patronizing smile. Deborah, you're being too academic. This isn't a hospital. This is a business. We've got it covered. It was like talking to a wall. They kept using these phrases, too academic, overly cautious, not understanding the business side, like they were compliments, but they always felt like subtle put-downs, a way to dismiss my concerns without actually addressing them. The office environment, which had seemed so vibrant, started to feel less vibrant. It was more like a highly polished machine, and if you questioned any part of the machine, you were seen as a cog slowing things down. Everyone was always rushing, talking about hitting targets, scaling up, getting more followers. The actual science, the rigorous testing, the proof that their all-natural products actually worked or were even truly safe, felt secondary. My gut kept telling me something was off. My pharmacist training, my love for biology, they were practically screaming at me that some corners were being cut. But when I brought it up, even gently, I was always met with that same cold shoulder, that same dismissive smile. It was frustrating, honestly, to be constantly undervalued for the very skills I thought they hired me for. I started to wonder if I was just being overly sensitive, or if I truly didn't get this fast-paced startup world. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about me. It was about the numbers, and something felt very wrong with how they got them. After a few more weeks at Pura Life, that small, nagging feeling in my gut started to grow into a full-blown alarm. It began subtly, as most bad things do. I was mostly assigned to review incoming lab reports from external labs that tested our raw ingredients and finished products. My job was to cross-reference them with our internal specifications and make sure everything matched up. It seemed straightforward, but because I'm a pharmacist, I'm trained to look for tiny details, for any deviation that could hint at a problem. And I started finding them. Not huge, obvious red flags right away, but subtle weirdnesses. For example, for one of our biggest sellers, the Pure Energy Boost capsules, you know, the ones with all the B vitamins and adaptogens that supposedly give you a clean burst of energy. The lab reports for certain batches seemed almost too perfect. Like, if a test result should naturally have a bit of a range, a little fluctuation, these results were always exactly on the dot, or just barely above the minimum required for our claims. It was like they were too good to be true. And my science brain kept whispering, when something is too good to be true, it usually is. Then came the time I was looking at the efficacy test results for a new sleep aid supplement we were about to launch. This one was supposed to make you fall asleep faster and get deeper REM sleep. The reports were glowing, showing incredibly consistent positive results. But I remembered seeing some raw data files earlier, just brief glimpses of a spreadsheet, that seemed to show a lot more variability, more people not reacting as strongly. It was almost like the final, official report had cherry-picked only the best outcomes, or maybe even, adjusted them. The thought made my stomach clench. You can't just make up results, especially for something people are putting into their bodies to help them sleep. That's not just bad science, that's dangerous. I decided I needed to get to the bottom of it. I started quietly comparing different versions of reports, looking at the time stamps, trying to find the original raw data sheets. It was like putting together a puzzle, but a really disturbing one. The more I looked, the clearer it became. There were inconsistencies everywhere. Missing data points, altered figures, entire batches of tests that seemed to have vanished if they didn't meet the perfect criteria. It wasn't a mistake, it was a systematic pattern. Someone was actively manipulating the numbers, making our products look more potent, safer, or more effective than they actually were. This wasn't just about making money, it was about deceiving people, about potentially putting their health at risk with products that might not work, or worse, might have unknown side effects because they weren't properly tested. My heart pounded whenever I uncovered another piece of evidence. My pharmacist's oath, everything I believed in about scientific integrity, was screaming at me. I couldn't just ignore it. I had to do something. So, I took a deep breath and scheduled a meeting with Brad, the CEO, and also brought in Dr. Jenkins, who was the head of our R&D department. I thought if I laid out the scientific facts clearly, they would understand the gravity of the situation. Brad, Dr. Jenkins, I started, trying to keep my voice calm and professional. I've been reviewing the recent lab reports for the Pure Energy Boost and the new Sleep ZZZ product. I've found some discrepancies. I showed them charts I'd put together, comparing raw data to the final reports. For example, here on the Sleep ZZZ, the initial trials showed a wider range of sleep onset times. But the final report only includes results that fit the less than 15 minutes claim. And for Pure Energy, these specific batch numbers for raw ingredients, their certificates of analysis show a lower concentration of active compounds than what's claimed on the label, yet the final product tests report full potency. Dr. Jenkins, who usually seemed pretty focused on his spreadsheets, shifted uncomfortably. Brad, however, leaned back in his chair, a small, impatient smile on his face. Deborah, he said, sighing dramatically, we've been over this. Those are minor variations. Every lab has them. You're looking at things with too much of a microscope. We have deadlines. We have investors. We have customers who love our products. But Brad, I insisted, trying to stay calm, these aren't minor variations. These are significant alterations to data. If these products aren't delivering what we claim, or if there are unverified safety risks because we're fudging the tests, that's not just bad for business. That's a huge ethical issue. It's misleading consumers. It could even be dangerous. My voice probably got a little bit shaky, because this was my specialty, and they were just dismissing it. Dr. Jenkins chimed in, trying to sound reasonable. Deborah, we understand your concerns. You're a pharmacist, you're cautious. We appreciate that. But sometimes, in the real world, you have to be a bit more flexible. We're a fast-paced company. We don't have time to redo every single test because of a few outliers. The products work. Our customers are happy. Happy because they think it works, based on fabricated data. I almost shouted, my frustration bubbling over. I quickly lowered my voice. Look, if we're putting out products that don't match their claims, or worse, are unsafe, that's fraud. And it's illegal. We need to fix this. Brad's smile vanished. His eyes, usually so charming, turned cold. Deborah, let me be very clear. We don't appreciate you questioning our integrity. Or slowing down our operations. You're creating unnecessary roadblocks. We hired you to ensure quality, not to invent problems where there are none. Perhaps you're just not the right fit for our innovative, fast-paced culture. He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. Think about your priorities, Deborah. Over the next few days, the air in the office was thick with unspoken tension. People avoided my gaze. Sarah, my direct manager, gave me sympathetic but distant looks. I knew I was being watched, that my days were numbered. I kept working, kept my head down, but I also started making copies of some of the most damning documents. Not for any grand plan yet, just because my gut told me I needed them, that these people were capable of anything. I tried to mentally prepare myself, but nothing really prepares you for it. It happened on a Tuesday. I was called into Brad's office, along with HR. Brad didn't even try to smile this time. He was all business. "Deborah," he said, his voice flat, "we've decided to let you go. Your employment with Pura Life Organics is terminated, effective immediately." I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. My mind raced. Why? Is it about my concerns with the data? The HR lady, a stiff woman named Miss Davies, cut in before Brad could answer. "Your role is being eliminated due to a strategic realignment. Also, frankly, your performance evaluations indicated a lack of team alignment and a tendency to overanalyze issues that impeded progress." Brad added, "You just weren't a good fit, Deborah. You slowed us down. We need people who understand the vision, not people who create unnecessary problems. You're calling me incompetent because I found fraud." I managed to choke out, my voice trembling with disbelief and rage. Brad just stared at me, unblinking. "We wish you the best in your future endeavors. Your final paycheck will be mailed. Security will escort you out." I was stunned. Fired. For doing my job, for trying to prevent a massive fraud that could hurt people. Walking out of that building, past all the smiling faces, feeling like a criminal, was one of the most humiliating moments of my life. But beneath the humiliation, a burning anger started to ignite. They thought they could just dismiss me, silence me, call me incompetent. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had no idea what I had seen, and what I had taken with me. Getting fired from Pura Life hit me like a physical punch. One day, I was full of purpose, working what I thought was my dream job, surrounded by kombucha on tap and bright, shiny people. The next, I was out on the street, clutching a small box of my personal belongings, feeling like a complete failure. The words kept echoing in my head, "Not a team player, overanalyze, not a good fit." It was humiliating, honestly. I'd always been a good student, a dedicated employee, and now suddenly, I was being told I wasn't good enough for a job I loved, simply because I cared about doing it right. For a few days, I just drifted. I binge-watched TV shows, ordered too much takeout, and stared at my resume, wondering how I was supposed to explain this gap. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, hoping it was Pura Life calling to say it was all a mistake, that they'd rehired me. But of course, they never did. I felt angry, confused, and just plain rejected. I kept replaying my conversations with Brad and Sarah, trying to figure out where I went wrong, if I had been too pushy, too demanding. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just too academic for the real world of fast-paced business. The self-doubt was crushing. But beneath all that self-pity and anger, something else started to fester. It was a nagging, uncomfortable feeling, like a splinter lodged deep inside that you just can't ignore. It was the thought of those lab reports. The fudged numbers. The missing data. The way Brad had dismissed my concerns with such cold indifference. I couldn't shake it. My pharmacist's brain, all that training about scientific integrity and patient safety, kept screaming at me. What if it wasn't just me being too much? What if it was them being dangerous? I remembered a few emails I'd quickly forwarded to my personal account, just little things that felt off at the time, a draft of a lab report that changed significantly in the final version, a memo discussing optimizing results for marketing purposes, not scientific accuracy. I also had my own meticulous notes from meetings where I'd flagged issues, complete with dates and specific product batches. I didn't have some grand plan when I saved them, it was just a habit, a way to keep track of my concerns. But now, they felt like breadcrumbs leading down a very dark path. So, one morning, instead of scrolling through job boards, I opened up my laptop and started digging. It wasn't about revenge at first. It was about peace of mind. I just needed to know if I was crazy, or if my gut feeling was right. I started by looking through those saved emails. One, in particular, was chilling. It was a chain between Brad and the head of sales, talking about how a certain batch of our immune shield supplement wasn't hitting the advertised vitamin C potency in the initial tests. The sales head was panicking because they'd already pre-sold a huge order. Brad's reply was short: get it to pass. We can't afford a delay. Just optimize the method. Optimize the method, that was the euphemism, I realized now, for fudging the numbers. Then I pulled up the official lab report for that very batch. And just like I suspected, it showed a perfectly high vitamin C potency, exactly matching the label claims. But I remembered seeing an earlier draft of that report, sitting on a shared drive, which had shown a much lower number. That draft was gone from the company server, of course, but I had a screenshot I'd taken, just because I was confused by the initial low result. My heart started pounding. This wasn't just one optimization. This was deliberate. I started cross-referencing other products. Our Calm and Focus gummies, for example. I remembered the internal discussions about how the key ingredient, L-theanine, was really expensive, and they were always looking for ways to cut costs. I found an email from Brad to the purchasing manager, basically telling them to find a cheaper supplier, even if the purity was slightly lower, because consumers won't notice a 5% difference. And then, I pulled up the lab reports for those batches. Surprise, surprise. They still showed the highest purity percentages, matching our premium claims. But how? I realized they were probably testing the first few samples from the cheaper supplier, the golden samples, and then applying those results to the entire, less pure, bulk order. It was systematic. The more I uncovered, the sicker I felt. This wasn't about me being incompetent. This was about them being fraudulent. And it wasn't just about making their product look better. These were supplements people were taking for their health. Immune Shield was supposed to boost immunity, especially important during flu season. If it didn't have the vitamin C claimed, people weren't getting what they paid for. The brain boost might not be boosting anything, but people would spend their hard-earned money hoping it would. The sleep ZZZ that I'd worked on, if the dosages were off, people might not get proper sleep, or worse, experience adverse effects if the mixture was inconsistent. The realization hit me with a force that knocked the wind out of me. This wasn't just a dishonest business practice. This was a direct danger to public health. Brad and his team weren't just cutting corners, they were actively deceiving consumers about products meant to improve their well-being. My anger at being fired, at being called incompetent, started to transform into something else, a cold, hard determination. I wasn't fighting for my job anymore. I was fighting for the people who trusted these products, people who might be putting their health at risk without even knowing it. My pharmacist's oath, the one I took so seriously, wouldn't let me back down. I had to expose them. I had to. The first few days after I stumbled onto the full truth about Purolife's fraud were a blur of shock and disgust. But that feeling didn't last. It quickly hardened into something cold and resolute. It wasn't about getting my job back, or proving to Brad that I was competent. This was way bigger than my pride. This was about public safety. About all those people out there buying Purolife products, believing the flashy marketing, thinking they were doing something good for their bodies, when really, they might be taking something useless, or even worse, something not properly tested. As a pharmacist, that thought it clawed at me. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't just let it go. So, I decided I was going to fight back. But not in a loud, shouting kind of way. Not yet, anyway. I knew I couldn't just tweet about it, or post on Facebook. Who would believe an angry, recently fired ex-employee against a booming company like Purolife? I needed proof. Undeniable, scientific, cold, hard proof. I had to build a case that even Brad couldn't dismiss with a charming smile and a wave of his hand. My apartment turned into my new lab. Instead of beakers and test tubes, I had stacks of paper, my laptop, and a whiteboard covered in notes. I pulled out every single document I had saved from my time at Puralife. Remember those little, off emails I'd forwarded to myself? Or the draft lab reports I'd screenshot because they just didn't make sense? Now, they were gold. I started sorting everything. I had emails about cutting costs on raw materials, internal memos about aggressive reporting of test results, and then, the actual lab reports, the real ones, the ones that showed the truth, compared to the official ones Puralife was putting out there. The more I organized, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a pattern. It wasn't one batch, or one product. It was systematic fraud across multiple product lines. They were consistently manipulating test results to make their supplements appear more effective, more potent, and sometimes, even safer than they truly were. It was mind-boggling how brazen they were. They were just lying, plain and simple, to millions of people. During this time, I felt incredibly isolated. I couldn't talk to my family or friends about it in detail. How do you explain that your dream job was actually a giant fraud operation without sounding paranoid or bitter? I knew I needed professional advice, but I couldn't just walk into a lawyer's office and say, "My old company is committing fraud." I needed to know how to present my evidence so it would be taken seriously. I thought about Dr. Ramirez, one of my old professors from pharmacy school. She was tough, but incredibly ethical and sharp. I decided to email her, asking if I could meet for coffee. I told her I had some hypothetical questions about whistleblowing and presenting scientific data to regulatory bodies. I didn't mention Puralife by name. She was super helpful. She told me to focus on creating a clear timeline, to highlight discrepancies using tables and graphs, and to always show the source of the data, the original versus the manipulated. She emphasized that regulatory bodies like the FDA look for patterns of deceit, not just isolated incidents. That's when I realized my detective work was exactly what I needed. She also told me about the best way to submit such information to the FDA. It needs to be concise, well organized, and backed by undeniable proof. It couldn't just be my word against theirs. It had to be their own documents, telling the story. That's what I set out to build, an unassailable dossier. I spent days turning my notes and screenshots into a structured report. I labeled everything clearly, referenced specific product batches, dates, email chains. It was like I was building a scientific paper, but the subject was fraud. There were moments of fear, too. What if Puralife found out I was doing this? What if they tried to silence me or sue me for defamation? But then I'd think about all those people taking supplements, trusting these companies with their health, and my fear would turn back into resolve. I was a pharmacist. My job was to protect people. And Puralife was doing the exact opposite. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about fighting for truth and public safety. And I had the proof. I had everything I needed. After weeks of turning my little apartment into a fraud investigation lab, compiling every piece of damning evidence I finally had it, my unassailable case. It was a thick digital file, full of meticulously organized spreadsheets, screenshots of dodgy emails, side-by-side comparisons of raw data versus the falsified reports. It was airtight. But now came the hardest part, figuring out what to do with it. My first instinct, honestly, was to blast it everywhere. To go on social media, contact every news outlet, scream from the rooftops about Puralife and their lies. The anger was still there, hot and simmering. I wanted to expose them, to shame Brad and everyone who called me incompetent for wanting to do things the right way. But then, my pharmacist brain kicked in. I thought about Dr. Ramirez, my old professor, and her advice. She'd talked about how regulatory bodies, like the FDA, were the ones with the real power to investigate, to issue recalls, to take legal action. A social media storm might get attention, but the FDA could get justice. And more importantly, they could stop Purolife from harming people. This wasn't about internet fame for me, it was about public safety. So, I decided on a strategic, formal route. I went to the website for the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, specifically looking for their Office of Dietary Supplement Programs, ODSP. I found their whistleblower program, read through all the guidelines, and prepared my submission. I wrote a cover letter, calm and professional, explaining that I was a licensed pharmacist with critical information regarding fraudulent testing and data manipulation by a dietary supplement company. I attached my entire dossier, making sure everything was clearly labeled and easy to understand, even for someone who wasn't a scientist. I didn't want any room for confusion or dismissal. Hitting send on that email felt monumental. My finger hovered over the mouse for what felt like an eternity. It was scary, putting myself out there, even anonymously at first. I was essentially taking on a multi-million-dollar company, with their fancy lawyers and PR teams. What if they traced it back to me? What if nothing happened? What if they just ignored it? But then, I remembered the faces of all those people buying Purolife products, trusting them with their health. And that fear just faded. I took a deep breath, and I clicked send. The waiting game was agonizing. Days turned into weeks. Every news alert I got, every headline about the supplement industry, I'd check it nervously, wondering if Purolife's name would pop up. Every time my phone rang, I jumped. Was it the FDA? Was it Purolife's lawyers? Nothing. Just the regular quiet hum of my life, which now felt completely different, charged with this secret mission. I'd check Purolife's social media. Everything seemed normal. New product launches, glowing testimonials, pictures of Brad smiling his perfect, charismatic smile. It was infuriating. Were they just going to get away with it? Then, after about a month and a half, I started noticing tiny, almost imperceptible shifts. My old colleague, Sarah, whom I still followed on LinkedIn, purely for professional curiosity, of course, changed her job title slightly, and her posts became less frequent, less overtly enthusiastic. The Purolife Instagram account, usually churning out 5 posts a day, went quiet for a few days, then resumed with noticeably toned-down marketing claims. No more revolutionary breakthroughs, just supportive wellness. It was like they were tightening up, getting cautious. My heart started to beat a little faster. Was it happening? Was the FDA finally moving? And then, the earthquake hit. It was a Tuesday, just like the day I got fired. I was eating breakfast, scrolling through my news feed, when I saw the headline. It wasn't on a small blog, it was on a major national news site. FDA launches major investigation into Purolife Organics over alleged data manipulation and consumer fraud. I almost dropped my phone. There it was. My report. My evidence. It had worked. The article detailed how the FDA was investigating systematic discrepancies in lab test results and misleading product claims. It mentioned unannounced inspections at Purolife's facilities and subpoenas issued to key executives. My hands were shaking as I read it. They were using my exact language, almost, describing the systematic nature of the fraud. The article included quotes from FDA spokespeople confirming the seriousness of the allegations and the potential health risks. Immediately, the internet exploded. Social media feeds were flooded with outrage. People who had been loyal Purolife customers felt betrayed. I saw comments like, "I can't believe I was feeding this to my kids," and, "They called this natural, and it was all a lie." Their stock, which had been soaring, plummeted faster than I could refresh the page. Brad and the Purolife team, who had always seemed so invincible, were now at the center of a national scandal. Purolife's initial reaction was exactly what I expected: denial, denial, denial. They issued a press release calling the allegations baseless and the unfortunate actions of a disgruntled former employee. They tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation of complex scientific data. Brad even went on a financial news channel, looking much less tanned and composed than usual, trying to reassure investors that it was just routine regulatory scrutiny. But it was clear he was panicking. His eyes darted around, his usual confident smile was replaced by a tight, strained grimace. He kept repeating the same phrases, but his words had lost all their charm. The public wasn't buying it. The FDA wasn't backing down. My meticulously compiled dossier, my quiet lab work, had truly paid off. It wasn't just a social media uproar, it was an official, government-backed investigation. And that's what truly started to unravel Purolife. Their carefully constructed facade of legitimacy, built on lies and charming smiles, was crumbling under the weight of the undeniable truth. And I, the incompetent pharmacist, was the one who had pulled the first thread. The news of the FDA investigation hit Purolife like a tidal wave, and it quickly became a tsunami. After that first big news report, it was like a dam broke. More and more details started to leak out, all based on the evidence I had provided to the FDA. Every day, it felt like there was a new article, a new segment on TV, talking about the systematic fraud at Purolife Organics. They even showed photos of their fancy San Diego office, which now just looked like a monument to lies. And Brad? Oh, Brad. The charismatic CEO who used to dismiss me with a smile and a wave of his hand. He tried to fight it, of course. His lawyers issued statement after statement, clinging to the disgruntled ex-employee narrative, threatening to sue media outlets for defamation. But it was useless. The FDA had their own undeniable evidence now, evidence that started with my detailed report and grew exponentially during their full investigation. Brad's perfectly tanned face, which used to beam confidence, started to look gaunt and stressed in every photo. His eyes, once so sharp and charming, now looked tired and desperate. As for me, I didn't want the spotlight. My initial report to the FDA was made anonymously. But as the investigation unfolded, and the FDA needed more specific details and potentially an expert witness who could explain the technical aspects of the fraud, they reached out to me. It was a strange feeling, being contacted by federal agents, knowing that my quiet work from my apartment had caused such an earthquake. I agreed to cooperate fully, to provide testimony if needed, but I asked to remain anonymous for as long as possible. My goal was justice, not fame. And justice was served. Purolife Organics, the company that called me incompetent for wanting to do things ethically, was eventually forced to declare bankruptcy. Their fancy offices were emptied, their products vanished from the shelves, and their name became synonymous with corporate fraud in the dietary supplement industry. Brad and his cronies were found guilty, their lives irrevocably changed by the consequences of their greed. For me, it wasn't about feeling a rush of revenge, not really. It was a quiet sense of satisfaction. A deep, profound sense of validation. I, the pharmacist who was dismissed for being too academic, had stood up for what was right. My integrity, which they tried to shatter, was completely restored. I was no longer the disgruntled ex-employee, I was a whistleblower, a catalyst for truth. After all that, I took some time to myself. The whole experience was draining, but also incredibly empowering. I realized my true passion wasn't just in the lab, it was in ensuring ethical science and protecting consumers. I eventually found a new job, not at a flashy startup, but at a reputable pharmaceutical company that puts patient safety and scientific rigor above all else. It's not as glamorous, perhaps, but it's where my heart truly belongs. I now work on research and development, making sure that every single claim we make about our products is backed by undeniable, honest science. And every day, I remember Purolife, and I know that sometimes, the quietest person with the strongest convictions can bring down the biggest lies. My story is a reminder that truth, eventually, always finds a way.